In the desert south of Tehran, at Iran's Natanz nuclear facility, buried beneath layers of concrete and earth, thousands of machines spun at nearly the speed of sound. These were Iran's gas centrifuges, the heart of its uranium enrichment program, and they were failing. Engineers watched their screens. Everything read normal. Temperatures, pressures, rotation speeds, all within acceptable ranges. But on the facility floor, centrifuge after centrifuge was tearing itself apart. Iranian scientists were being fired. Managers were being replaced. No one could explain what was happening. They couldn't explain it because the answer wasn't human error. It was a piece of code, 500 kilobytes of the most sophisticated malware ever written. A digital weapon built by two nations to do what bombs could not. This is the story of Stuxnet. To understand Stuxnet, you first need to understand what the world was facing in 2006. Iran had been developing nuclear technology for decades, officially for civilian energy. But Western intelligence agencies, particularly the CIA and Israel's Mossad, believed Iran was pursuing something else entirely: the capability to build a nuclear weapon. Diplomacy was failing. International sanctions had slowed Iran's progress, but hadn't stopped it. Every few months, inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency would visit the enrichment facility at Natanz and report that more centrifuges were being installed, more uranium was being enriched. Israel was running out of patience. There was serious talk in Tel Aviv about launching airstrikes against Natanz, a military operation that could have triggered a regional war drawn in the United States and destabilized the entire Middle East. The Bush administration needed an alternative. So in 2006, General James Cartwright, the head of United States Strategic Command, walked into the White House with a different kind of proposal. What if you could destroy Iran's centrifuges without dropping a single bomb? What if the weapon wasn't made of metal and explosives, but code? The president authorized it. The program was given a classified code name, Operation Olympic Games, and it would require building something that had never existed before, a piece of software that could reach through a computer network and physically break real machines. What they built would change warfare forever. Building Stuxnet was an engineering challenge unlike anything the intelligence community had ever attempted. The NSA and Israel's Unit 8200, their equivalent of the NSA, assembled a team of elite programmers. Kaspersky Lab later estimated it took at least 10 coders working for 2 to 3 years to create the worm in its final form. And the United States reportedly built a replica of the Natanz centrifuge cascades at Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee, so they could test the weapon on real equipment before deploying it. The worm had to operate across multiple layers of technology. First, it needed to spread through Windows computers. Then, it had to locate specific Siemens software, a program called Step 7, used to configure industrial controllers. Then it had to reprogram those controllers, known as PLCs, or programmable logic controllers, which directly commanded the centrifuges. 3 distinct layers of attack, each one requiring completely different expertise: network exploitation, industrial software engineering, and nuclear centrifuge physics. It's almost unheard of for a single piece of malware to bridge all 3. But before any of that mattered, they had to solve an even more fundamental problem. The Natanz facility was air-gapped. It had no connection to the internet whatsoever. You couldn't email the malware in. You couldn't exploit a web browser. There was no digital path from the outside world into that network. The weapon needed a human carrier. According to reports that surfaced years later, Dutch intelligence, the AIVD, recruited an Iranian engineer with access to the Natanz facility. This operative physically carried an infected USB drive into the plant and plugged it into one of the facility's computers. The air gap had been breached. Once inside the network, Stuxnet went to work, and the level of sophistication was staggering. The worm exploited 4 zero-day vulnerabilities in Windows, 4 previously unknown security flaws that no one had ever discovered or patched. In the cybersecurity world, a single zero-day is considered rare and extremely valuable. Governments pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for just one. Stuxnet burned through 4 of them in a single operation. It also carried stolen digital certificates from 2 legitimate Taiwanese companies, Realtek and J Micron. These certificates told Windows that Stuxnet's components were trusted software, signed by real manufacturers. The operating system installed them without raising a single alert. But here's the thing. Stuxnet wasn't interested in the Windows computers themselves. They were just stepping stones. The worm was searching for one very specific configuration: Siemens S7315 and S7417, programmable logic controllers connected to variable frequency drives running at very specific speeds, between 807 Hz and 1210 Hz. These were the exact operating parameters of the centrifuges at Natanz. If Stuxnet landed on any computer that didn't match this precise configuration, and the vast majority of the 100,000 machines it eventually infected didn't, it simply sat dormant, doing nothing, waiting. But when it found its target, it struck. The IR-1 centrifuge is a delicate machine, a tall, thin cylinder that spins uranium hexafluoride gas at roughly 63,000 revolutions per minute, just over 1,000 rotations every second. At those speeds, heavier uranium-238 is pushed outward, while the lighter uranium-235, the isotope needed for weapons, concentrates at the center. The process demands extraordinary precision. The slightest variation in speed, even a fraction of a percent, can cause vibrations that damage or destroy the centrifuge. Stuxnet exploited this fragility with surgical precision. Once embedded in the programmable logic controllers, the worm periodically altered the centrifuge speeds. It would push them up to 1410 Hz, far above their normal operating frequency, and then slam them down to as low as 2 Hz, nearly a complete stop, then back up again. This cycle of violent acceleration and deceleration created mechanical stress that the centrifuges were never designed to withstand. Bearings wore out, rotors warped, the machines shook themselves apart from the inside. But here is what made Stuxnet truly unprecedented, what elevated it from sophisticated malware to genuine weapon. While it was destroying the centrifuges, Stuxnet simultaneously recorded the normal operating data and played it back to the monitoring systems. A man-in-the-middle attack, but applied to physical infrastructure. The operators in the control room saw perfect readings, normal speeds, normal temperatures, normal pressures. Their screens told them everything was fine, but on the facility floor, the machines were dying. Imagine being an engineer at Natanz during this period. Your monitoring systems The instruments you've been trained to trust tell you everything is within parameters, but centrifuge after centrifuge keeps failing. You run diagnostics. Nothing appears wrong in the software. You replace the centrifuges. The new ones fail too. You start suspecting the hardware suppliers. You fire technicians. You bring in new engineers. Nothing helps. The Iranian government reportedly blamed its own people. Scientists were dismissed for incompetence. Some may have been suspected of sabotage. No one realized the sabotage was coming from inside the code. The Institute for Science and International Security later estimated that roughly 1,000 centrifuges were destroyed. Over 10% of the machines installed at Natanz. 6 entire cascades, each containing 164 centrifuges, taken out of commission between late 2009 and early 2010. From a cybersecurity professional's perspective, and this is something I think about in my own work, what Stuxnet exploited wasn't a technical vulnerability in the traditional sense. It exploited trust. The operators weren't careless. They weren't negligent. They were receiving false data from systems they had every reason to trust. And that, the manipulation of the feedback loop between a system and its operators, is the nightmare scenario that keeps every industrial security professional up at night. Stuxnet was designed to stay contained within Natanz, but code doesn't always follow orders. Sometime in 2010, an engineer who had been working at the facility connected his laptop to the internet. The worm, still programmed to replicate, spread outward. Within weeks, Stuxnet was propagating across the global internet. It infected machines in Indonesia, India, Pakistan, and dozens of other countries. Over 100,000 computers worldwide eventually carried the worm. But on most of those machines, it did absolutely nothing. It was looking for Natanz, and Natanz only. In June 2010, in Minsk, Belarus, a security researcher named Sergey Ulasin was working at a small antivirus company called Virus Blockader. He was investigating a routine customer complaint, a computer that kept rebooting for no apparent reason. Standard help desk stuff. But when Ulasin examined the code causing the reboots, he realized this was unlike anything he'd ever analyzed. The malware was massive, extraordinarily complex, and used techniques he'd never seen in the wild. He posted his findings to an online security forum. Within days, researchers at Symantec, Kaspersky Lab, and security firms around the world descended on the code. What they found astonished them. 500 kilobytes of meticulously crafted code, 4 zero-day exploits, stolen digital certificates from real companies, deeply specialized knowledge of Siemens industrial control systems, and hard-coded parameters, specific motor speeds, specific controller models, specific cascade configurations of exactly 164 units that matched only one facility on Earth. In September 2010, German researcher Ralph Langner became the first to publicly speculate that Stuxnet was a state-sponsored weapon targeting Iran's nuclear program. He later said that, in his opinion, Israel's Mossad was involved, but the leading force was what he called the cyber superpower, the United States. The security community had its answer. This wasn't cybercrime. This wasn't hacktivism. This was an act of war carried out entirely through code. In June 2012, New York Times journalist David Sanger revealed the full story. Stuxnet was the product of Operation Olympic Games, a joint cyber operation conceived during the Bush administration and dramatically expanded under President Obama. Sanger's reporting described a meeting in the White House Situation Room, late in Bush's presidency. pieces of a centrifuge destroyed during testing at Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee were spread across the conference table. Physical proof that a piece of software could destroy real industrial equipment. President Bush authorized the operation. When Obama took office in January 2009, he inherited the program as one of the government's most closely held secrets and ordered it accelerated. Even after the worm accidentally escaped into the wild in 2010, Obama chose to continue the attacks. A modified version of Stuxnet was deployed, and it was this variant that ultimately destroyed those 1,000 centrifuges. Stuxnet set Iran's nuclear program back by an estimated 1 to 2 years. But the consequences extended far beyond Natanz. Iran responded by building one of the most aggressive offensive cyber programs in the world. The country that was a target became a threat actor, launching its own attacks against banks, energy companies, and governments across the Middle East and beyond. Stuxnet also proved something that many had theorized, but no one had demonstrated: that critical infrastructure, power grids, water systems, transportation networks could be attacked and physically damaged through code. Every nation with industrial infrastructure suddenly had a new category of threat to worry about, and the United States established Cyber Command, US Cybercom, to prepare for a new era of conflict where the battlefield was digital. In 2011, the Israeli Defense Forces released a retirement video for their outgoing chief, Gabi Ashkenazi. In that video, Stuxnet was listed as one of the accomplishments of his tenure. It was the closest any official from either government has ever come to claiming credit. No government has officially acknowledged building Stuxnet. No one has been formally charged with creating it. The engineers who wrote the code have never been identified. The agent who carried the USB drive into Natanz remains unknown. The first cyber weapon in history was built in secret, deployed in silence, and discovered by accident. And its legacy, the idea that code can be a weapon of war, is something the world is still reckoning with today. If you found this valuable, subscribe to Dark Operators. Next time, we go inside Lazarus Group, North Korea's state-sponsored hackers who stole nearly $1 billion.